Good morning, everyone. It is Sunday, May 17th, 2015. Subject, Mortals and Immortals. We did have a great Bible study yesterday. Thank you, Shahidat, and all of you. But we will talk a little bit about the lesson before we get into some other things. One thing I do want to mention, too, in your daily work, we have the Unity Watches, but you should be watching independently, too. Make sure that you are handling weather, these tornadoes out in the Midwest, or torrential rains, or any of these things that are touching anybody, anywhere. You certainly work for your own community, definitely. And then you go out and work, do the world work. But it should be done on a daily basis, and whatever time you can give to it. And even if it's just negating it and knowing the truth about it when you hear it on the news. But all of this, it's up to us to be doing this work. Mrs. Eddy in her home had them daily working on the weather, and any extremes of weather she would not accept. And of course, there are other things you're hearing in the news too. That we just keep our work persistently. Truth persists, error does not. We don't take anything for granted. We don't want to be looking in retrospection and think, oh, I should have been working on that. No, we do it now. And not to forget or neglect our duty to God, to our leader, and to mankind. So in the lesson today, do any of you have any questions or anything you wanted to bring out that we didn't discuss yesterday? Some of you weren't here, but you can listen to it on the...
Yes, actually. One of the things that I noticed was it says, and Saul had gotten papers and he was going to go to Damascus and bring back any Christians and so forth. And I thought, well, boy, let's clean up Jerusalem. Now I'm on my way to Damascus. So I looked up Damascus, and it's 145 miles away from Jerusalem in another country. And I thought, boy, he's really enthused. Talk about zeal. Clean up that other country and bring back the Christians from there.
Thank you. Yeah, he was out to get them. So, anybody else? I wanted to mention, and I've mentioned it to you before, but it should be all emblazoned on your foreheads. It's 1 Corinthians 15:10. I mentioned that movie called The Express, where the grandfather they were praying this prayer every morning, the grandfather and a little boy. And that little boy went on later to become a great football player, but he overcame a lot of odds and things that would tell him that he couldn't succeed, but he overcame them, which proves when one person does it, it means any person can do it. And so, does anyone have it there to read? Okay, Bruce?
I have it.
Okay, go ahead.
But by the grace of God, I am what I am. And his grace, which was bestowed upon me, was not in vain, but I labored more abundantly than they all. Yet not I, but the grace of God, which was in me.
Thank you, which was with me, yes.
Sorry.
So, if any of you feel, you're not worthy in any way, or you've got so much to overcome, you think about this. You think about what Saul did and how he became Paul. But what's so beautiful in this is he knew it was not him. It was God's grace that did it. And he labored all the more abundantly. And sometimes it does. It requires great work on our part. Steadfastness, especially when we're coming out of hell and false beliefs and negative thinking that has been with you or was seen for your entire life. Yeah, you do have to labor, but God is working in you. And it's not you, but the grace of God which is with you. Anything can be overcome with this. The amazing grace of God So live with that. I had never even seen that or been aware of it till I saw that movie, and then I was so taken with it. So live with it. It can overcome anything. Why? Because it's the power of God. It's not you striving so hard to accomplish something. It is God. God's purpose for you unfolding. Anything can be overcome. It has been, it is, and it will be. And then I love where Mrs. Eddy says, the truth pierces the era of mortality as a sunbeam penetrates the clouds. Remember that in your declarations of truth, that they're piercing mortality, just as a sunbeam pierces the cloud. Great power to it. So stay with your declarations of the truth and know it is having an effect, because it is.
Maybe that's why truth is often referred to as a sword.
Yeah, right.
It lops the head off of error. Nothing personal, of course, but
yeah, and
but it is final.
But that's a wonderful picture. Think about a day where it's all overcast, dark, gray, whatever, but above it, that sun is shining, and it is still piercing those clouds. And it does make it. The clouds do clear away. They aren't like a permanent fixture. So the sun is always working.
That's it. Thank you. Yeah, even when you see the clouds, you know the sun is behind them. It's there. So it's always there. You just have to reach out for it and recognize its existence. And then through repentance, spiritual baptism, and regeneration, mortals put off their material beliefs and false individuality. I wrote a little bit about that on the forum, but all of us have in belief this false, it's a personality, personal sense of things. And Mrs. Eddy says it's just as important, or more important, to overcome that as it is sin, disease, and death, because that's how sin, disease, and death gets to you, through this mortal, personal sense of things. And so be careful what you say about yourself, or what you say about others, or how you label your children or grandchildren or anybody. See them as God's child. So what would be the difference between personality and your individuality in God? Can you give examples?
Well, personality could have all kinds of flaws in it. Somebody could be lazy or critical, or even if you look at them as beautiful humanly, then that can turn to ugly. But spiritual individuality would be a reflection of God and would always be good and beautiful.
Thank you. So who wouldn't want that? And claim it for yourself, and claim it for all those you know. Carpenter, in one of the watching points, talks about your surplus thinking. Does anyone know what that is, surplus thinking?
Well, there's always things going through your head. You may not realize it, but it is indeed happening. That stream is flowing. But when we're lazy and not alert, guess what stream comes in at that point in time? It's all of the negativity, anything that's worldly that just wants to impress itself upon you, and it's not good because it doesn't have a divine source.
Thank you.
It's extra thinking that shouldn't be. It's something that needs to be cleaned out. It's something we all have to watch for. I'm not pointing the finger at anyone. I have to watch this as much as anyone. It's all part of our task, daily task.
Thank you. Yeah, you get up in the morning and you're working on your lesson or thinking about things correctly. I love it. A while ago, Tom said, yeah, he would read his lesson, then he would get up and start worrying. So that's your surplus thinking. That's what you have to rein in and bring into obedience to Christ. And I bring it up here because if you're not careful, what you think about yourself can be surplus. It's not good. You're identifying yourself with something other than God good. And very often in families, you all that, my husband or my son or whoever, just always just doing this to me all the time, and I mean, it happens, so watch it. If you're doing that, you're malpracticing on the person. All that surplus thinking you could be spent knowing the truth about the person and expecting them to be the child of God. Instead, you are thinking the worst about them. And when you live with someone, you seem to know them so well and know their foibles, or, maybe even if they're trying to do right, you think, oh, well, that's not going to last, I know. You think all kinds of crummy thoughts like that. Watch it. You receive what you believe, they say.
Yeah, and we bring out in people what is in our own thought. Think about it. When you're with someone who is upbeat and so forth, positive, it tends to bring out the best in you, doesn't it? If you waste your time hanging around with negative people, it can drag you down. So recognize you have an impact on the people around you, the way you think. And it's not so much what you say, it's what's in your thought. This idea of personality versus individuality, we had an article by Reverend Kratzer, maybe somebody, I don't remember.
Betty talks about it quite a bit.
But we had an article recently that explained this, I thought, very well. That personality is a description of nothing but restrictions and limitations. Think about it. When you think about a person's personality, you're talking about limitations. Whereas when you think about someone's individuality in the correct way, it's a picture of unlimited abilities.
And in dealing with someone who maybe you have this negative concept of, and you're changing it, let your expectation be from the Lord. What does God say about this person? Don't have it your expectation, your negative expectation. Raise it up. Let your expectation be from God. So what if he hasn't cleaned the kitchen in all the 20 years that you were married to him? Maybe today he will. Let your expectation, expect him to do right. See him right. Don't hold on to those old errors and chew them up. My mother, she had 6 sisters, and for the most part they were all good girls, and they would ask her mother, who was known as Mammy, how she did it, and she just said she expected them to behave themselves. She expected them to be good. She expected them to do well in school. Her expectation was from the Lord. And because of that, and she was a good Christian woman, because of that, those girls behaved themselves, all of them. Have your expectation from God. That always impressed me so, because, it's so easy just to get into a rut and think a person's always going to be the way he or she has been. Maybe that can be somebody at work, but it's usually someone you know well. So unknow them and know them in God.
I think it's important to remember that I've changed. There's things that, of course, I didn't used to do that now I do. And so it's important for me to remember that so that I know that I don't have the right to limit anybody and say that they can't change when I've had several changes myself and then still changing daily. So I just think that's very important for me to remember, and it's very helpful.
Thank you, Dede. Absolutely. And also the idea that whoever it is, they are in your thought, in your consciousness. That's where the dominion is. So think of them and see them as God would. Stay with it. And that doesn't mean, though, that you don't correct an error or separate the error from the person, and you certainly don't have to love that error. Absolutely not. No. That error must destroy itself, but make sure that you are seeing them as God made them. It will certainly help improve and change your experience. And I know, because done it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know a Christian Science teacher who actually used this concept and really increased the grade point of her students in a major level. You know, this was it's a public school, of course, and people always think, oh, these kids are, what do they call them, at-risk kids who come from homes that are dysfunctional, etc., etc. And so nothing good was expected. But actually it was a he. He went in there and with what he knew about science, saw daily God's children, and it really did change. They were even invited as a school of excellence in the end. So
thank you. That is wonderful, and that's why teachers have such a great honor and responsibility to do just that. Absolutely. This is how we change our world, by just doing this, beholding the perfect man. You do it in your own home, your own life, your own business, whatever your circumstance, your sphere of, and it ripples out. Thank you, Florence. Anybody else? That he says, but he who is begotten of the beliefs of the flesh and serves them can never reach in this world the divine height of our Lord. And that really impressed me. If I'm holding on to false beliefs, I'm really not any use to God. And I'm not going to accomplish the things God has for me to do. Thank you. And one of the false beliefs is that you have this human personality. And it was probably laid on you as a child. That's why what Florence said is so important. Teachers say, oh, well, that person's stupid in math and good in history, or, all that stuff, all the limitations that Gary was mentioning. No limitations to a child of God.
It's really a cruel thing to put that kind of judgment on someone else. A cruel way to judge. One thing that's helped me so many times is the statement from Science and Health where Mrs. Eddy says, we must perform perfect models in thought and look at them continually if we're going to carve them out in grand and noble lives. So this whole idea of perfection is the model that we look at. That's where we get our sense of direction from.
Thank you, yeah.
Let that be a habit of doing it.
Yeah.
I know for me, sometimes it can be very discouraging. I'm looking at this perfect model, and it seems like I've got so much to carve out. It can be discouraging, but at least we got the direction pointed out. There's another statement that's helped me a lot. It says, if you believe in and practice wrong knowingly, you can, at once, change your course and do right. So that option of changing your course and doing right is always there. It's always an open door.
All it takes is humility.
Thank you.
To turn on a dime and admit that you made a mistake.
Yeah,
and then leave it behind.
That was what was so refreshing, as we talked about yesterday, was about David and also Saul, who became Paul. They so readily admitted their mistake. and just relinquished it. Didn't hang on to it, didn't blame others. And then, go ahead. Sorry?
I think that's the childlike thought when we don't, because children just let it go. They forget it and go on to the reality. Adults tend to carry the garbage, and that's what I was today asking myself. Why don't you open up to your childlike thought? Because Jesus worked with the children, and they immediately were receptive, just like Mrs. Eddie did.
Thank you.
Yep.
And that's in the lesson too. Willingness to become as a little child and to leave the old for the new renders thought receptive of the advanced idea. Thank you, Zari. Think of yourself as a little child. I like to do that occasionally. Think what a little child is like and be that way. Happy, ready to go, taking their father and mother's hand, peaceful. I'm talking childlike, not childish. There is a difference. So, but that pure sense of the child, innocent, never discouraged. I mentioned once, they when they're learning to walk, they fall down. They don't sit there and say, "I'll never try again." How absurd. No, they keep trying. They keep falling down. They keep getting up. They keep falling down. They keep getting up. So what should we be? Or they don't blame anybody else, or they don't think their legs don't work, or they just keep at it till they're victorious. So have that wonderful childlike spirit within. Thanks for bringing that up, sorry. And then also I liked in the Science and Health, the purpose and motive to live aright can be gained now. This point 1, you have started as you should. You have begun at the numeration table of Christian Science, and nothing but wrong intentions can hinder your advancement. Working and praying with true motives, your Father will open the way. Who did hinder you that you should not obey the truth? There again, what are your intentions? What are your motives? That's why motives are so important. If your motives are right, God will open the way. You can trust it. You can claim it. It's a biblical promise. He will. If you think He isn't, then your eyes are blinded to what He's doing for you. He is opening the way. Don't declare He's not. He is.
Now ask yourself, what is your motive? Look at Saul. What was his motive? He was doing the worst things, but what was his motive?
To serve God.
Yeah, he thought he was serving God. He thought he was helping mankind. I mean, you can make the worst mistakes in the world, but if your motive is good, God will show you.
Yeah, God will lead you out of it if you're making a terrible mistake and put you back on the right path. And this is what we must know when we see others who seem to have a very bad motive, or even if they think their motive is good. Yeah, Mrs. Evans used to say something about that. Someone who is convinced about what they're doing, and that's one of the hardest things. They have this righteous conviction that what they're doing is right. That can be difficult at first to overturn, but it can be. It can be. You just have to be persistent with it. Open their eyes that they will see. And sometimes the best way in dealing with that is not to talk it where they rise up and resist what you were saying, but just mentally to know that the truth, God speaks to them. They're obedient to the mind that made them. And the truth will be revealed, and they can change their course.
Yeah, and be careful in dealing with people like that, because you can't argue, and oftentimes you can't necessarily persuade. Oftentimes you have to wait for God to change the heart.
Absolutely. Anyone else on the lesson? Or? Yesterday I mentioned, and I'm going to give a little time to this today, and we'll continue the discussion, and then we'll go to fallibility of human concepts. I mentioned the fact Elizabeth a few weeks ago asked, well, we should have an article, or what is the difference between our church, and I call it the organization now. So yesterday I mentioned it at Bible study. A few of you have had a chance to think about it. Carol is going to take notes for us so we can write an article and have it on our website, or maybe we'll put it in Love is the Liberator. We'll see. Anyone want to say, and this is of course all individual, what you found the difference to be?
The first thing I noticed, my mother had told me about Plainfield, and I hadn't been to the Christian Science Church for a long time, and gave me a healing thought. And I started reading it. It was like, wow, this is great. There was no guilt in it. That was the big difference for me, was it always felt guilty at the other church. And I never did here.
Thank you.
One of the things that I think is really important that I get here is that the error is uncovered, and then the truth and love are allowed to come through, instead of saying God is love and glossing over it. In fact, I think that when I look at a problem I had to deal with 15 years ago that has come up again, I think that sort of Pollyanna glossing over is what has to be with uncovering and then seeing it and setting it right. That's what I've learned in Plainfield.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's very important.
For me, there's a great sense of responsibility that comes with being here that I didn't have in my other church. Everything was just about coming to church on Sunday and reading the lesson during the week, but we didn't have to do anything. There was no work that had to be done. And here, we do have to do work all day, every day, and that's why our testimony meetings are so different, because we're able to share what we've been practicing and what we've been learning and what the results are. And in my other church, the testimony meetings were the exact opposite. Nobody had anything to say because nobody was doing anything. So that's been great for me. And with that sense of responsibility, there's a great sense of power, because it just lets me know that something can be done always. We don't have to just sit here and take all the things that are going on. We have to do work. And it's just been a great difference for me, and it's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, to me, just to add to that, the difference here is so clear to me because class instruction, the 10 days of class instruction in the church, in the organization, it was just on paper. Your instruction is interactive and continual. They're not just 10 days.
Thank you. That's absolutely true.
I think for me, the biggest thing is this, letting alone the moral changes that should come with the healing. Now, nobody wants to talk about someone being selfish or someone being prideful or anything like that. I never heard anything addressed, not even I'm talking about myself. Nobody would say anything. No practitioner ever mentioned anything else that I needed to work on. It was always whatever I presented, we'll let love, do the work and all this. But there are things to change. Ms. Betty talks about Christian Science healing, doing with character information as well. It's not just getting comfortable now. The headache is gone and things like that. And I saw other people who suffered from whatever needed to be corrected that they were probably never alerted to. And it really there were some serious things that happened, and it doesn't need to happen. And I think this is why it's so dangerous that you can go along thinking, oh, I'm a Christian Scientist, so everything is fine, when everything is not fine.
Thank you. That is great.
You know, I think probably to me, the first foremost thing that distinguishes the Plainfield Church is that the Plainfield Church is independent and democratic.
Thank you.
You know, I went all through Sunday school, and the Sunday school teachers always said use your science, but never told us how. And that was one of the first things that I realized when I came to Plainfield was I know how to use my science, but it's the truth.
Thank you, Elsie.
I think that then is really pointing out the teaching on animal magnetism is very clear at this church. And another thing I came across somebody who was writing, and I'll probably send it in to you when I get the full article, but they were talking about the importance of frank, honest, fresh, uncompromising language when you're addressing your audience, so that you build confidence in their thought, and it abides by rules. It's not, so I found that the stuff I was reading before was not clear. It had no form of or principle, and there was this middle road, and you have no middle road, which is very important.
Thank you very much. Oh, great, Phil.
One of the things that I'd like to mention is that I think when I work with the practitioners from Plainfield, a lot of work is sent back to me to do and to reflect on, like read Miscellany 294 and ponder it. And so, of course, practitioners would say this, but they would not really get you to go through your own involvement in it. So this is like an ongoing class instruction instead of maybe the 10 days that I haven't gone through.
Thank you.
I think the idea of making God first, God must be first. I used to sometimes read the lessons, sometimes early in the morning, but often not. Maybe sometime I'll do it in the afternoon, or I'll do part of it. But here, it's instilled that no, God is first. We must put Him first. And then the practicality of using what you're learning. As mentioned before, God is love, God is love. But how do I know that God is love? How do I use this truth that God is love? And through the tapes, I say that, how you should do it. Through your day, do you have your thought on God at all? So it's these little things, these little practical things in using science that really are life-changing, and life-changing in the right way to practice science the way it should be practiced. And this is what I just can't say thanks enough to what has happened at Plainfield and is happening at Plainfield.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I just want to share and give thanks. The difference that I've seen in this church is that he always mentions and works about animal magnetism. So I wanted to follow what someone said about it, because I just never heard a church that would work so much to be alert and of the ways of animal magnetism. And I'm glad I have never heard anyone say to heal animal magnetism, but to handle animal magnetism. And those two things have made a big difference for me to have so much appreciation and admire this church.
Thank
you.
Yes, the belief to be destroyed, because it's a belief in a power apart from God. Well, those start. Go ahead, Tom.
Just adding a couple of things about being independent democratic. The Plainfield Church would not sign, no member would sign a loyalty oath to a group of people. That we don't believe in. Okay.
Yes.
Also, in fiscal independence, there's no way the Plainfield Church would assign its deed to someone else. It manages its own destiny, financially speaking.
Thank you, Tom.
That's right.
One also appreciates the fact that the early workers' books are not proscribed, that I finally have been able to read them.
Yes, I was kind of waiting for that.
Yeah. All this unauthorized literature.
Right.
Baloney.
Coordination.
Something that's very refreshing about this church is that everything is open and honest. Everyone shares things. There are no secrets, and everyone benefits from everything that everyone says and experiences, and it's all open and free to everyone.
Thank you, and that goes along with no pride. And it's so refreshing. You know a person is really over something when they can tell somebody else and talk about it freely, because that means they know it wasn't them. It was an error. They got rid of it, and they want to help other people as well. Thank you.
Also, I mentioned that I have a copy of the 23rd version, Science and Health, and you'll notice something in there, and you'll notice in practically every other copy of Science and Health is that they have a picture of Mary Baker Eddy in it. And they've removed that. And I think this kind of gets to respect for Mary Baker Eddy, that they actually seem to hide respect for Mary Baker Eddy.
Thank you very much.
And on that lines too, you provide a Science and Health that has how she set it up. The new Science and Health are missing two of the testimonies at the back. They've been removed.
Yes.
Oh dear.
We don't use their manual either, do we?
No. We don't use their manual.
Yeah, that's really important. We use the last manual that Mary Baker Eddy published. That's the one we use, Mary Baker Eddy's manual.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
And we do watches. That's a big one.
Thank you very much. How are we doing, Elizabeth?
I mean, along the lines of respecting Mary Baker Eddy, Plainfield Church would never destroy a house that Mary Baker Eddy lived in. Nor would we dynamite any monument to Mary Baker Eddy. We would never even think of those things. It's incomprehensible that we'd go and completely obliterate one of her houses or dynamite a monument made to Mary Baker Eddy. We just don't do those things or think that way.
True.
I think it's interesting that is the house she loved most, right? The Pleasant View.
That's correct.
Right. That's right.
And along with the financial independence that we believe in, we do believe in managing our finances because, the Boston Church was profligate and they defended it. They wouldn't even admit that they were doing anything wrong. And we would never do that.
Thank you.
And I have to tell you, that's the reason I left the Boston Church. They were spending money, bankrupting themselves, and I didn't think I could belong to an organization that did that. And when I mentioned it, people got mad at me. You're not supposed to bring that up. You should be praying to the board.
One of the things that really made me think about this whole situation, which is not only the money, but also that many times the lecturers will go to other countries and but the lectures are not the depth that we're going to talk about Christian Science, we have to have depth. And I think that the last manual said that the lecture, the whole thing was to be dismantled, am I right?
Yes.
And also that we couldn't have any new teachers unless Mrs. Eddy authorized them.
That's true.
And we still have teachers and we still have these lecturers, and I'm not so sure that people see the difference between Christian Science and New Thought when they go to them.
Thank you.
Right.
Anybody else?
I think I know there's no hierarchy. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Linda. You first. Hierarchy, yeah.
Yeah, and everybody has a place in church and is treated very honorably and respectfully and tenderly.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I'd like
And who else was speaking?
That was Elizabeth. I was just going to say, I've learned, I think, more about the spirit of Christian Science rather than the letter, and I think a lot of that has to do with the jargon that is presented with the Boston speech that can get, overdone.
Thank you.
I would like to add that growing up, I went to the Sunday school and so forth and got out of it right after Sunday school, was that I always felt that Christian Science was true. And especially when you read the Science and Health, there's just this ring of truth about it. But in the church, it was always the mother church type church. There was always this niceness and everything all is pleasant and good and all that. But here in Plainfield, it's real.
Thank you.
You can feel the truth in it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, because all that niceness really covers up a multitude of sin, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does.
It's a cover-up. Mrs. Evans once, in one of her classes, came out with a statement that nice is a four-letter word.
Yeah, she despised niceness, but she knew what was underneath the niceness.
Not a good thing.
Yeah, we be real. That's Mrs. Eddy talked about someone coming into her office or study and obviously had a cold, and she asked how that person was, and the person told her she was fine, and it wasn't true. And Mrs. Eddy rebuked that, said, "Tell the truth about the lie." We get things out to be healed. We don't dwell on it. We get it out to be healed. In New York administration, if you had a problem, people would, what did they do wrong? And, the negative. Here, if you have a problem, everybody's loving, supporting, and helping in any way they can to bring out the healing and be the perfect child of God. They don't see you as a sinning mortal. Thank you.
Yeah, I also want to point out that there's kind of like a trend in the Boston church to focus a lot on the healing. I'm not sure if I can articulate that right, but...
Well, you just did. That was pretty good.
No, you're right. You're right, Tom. It's a big deal.
And, I'm reading one from some teacher who's talks about Christian Science in terms of being non-traditional medicine. And also talks about relating it to other alternative forms of healing. So someone can probably articulate better than I can, but
no, you're doing just fine.
We just don't go in that direction,
Well, it's just another example of the attempt to humanize divine science.
You might as
it
well
can't be humanized. Yeah, they have tried to humanize Mrs. Eddy.
And get it into New Age and get it to where there is no God in it, really, or no moral compass in it. It's just visualizing, and God is love, and we're all should have everything we want, which is very, very disastrous. I looked up Scientology recently just because I was curious. I don't know anything about it, and I still don't profess to know much. And I looked at their website, and it did say, they believe in God. But one thing, it did not make any reference to the Bible. And, that's a point Tom has brought out a lot, and that's why this May Love is the Liberator edition is going to be speaking to that everything that we talk about, everything that Mrs. Eddy was and is based on the Bible. And there should be no question about it. It's rooted in the Bible. It makes me very uneasy when something is no longer rooted in the Bible, and it is why with Tom, the importance, he brought out the importance of the Bible study, so we know this, so we get into what the Bible is. This is another difference, perhaps. It has to be emphasized. We can't drift away from the Bible. It's most important. So,
and, we don't want to be dogmatic about this, about the different versions, because I think it's okay to read the different versions. But we do feel the King James Version is the one that we should be reading. And we've had examples in the past where you see that the spiritual insight was lost in the way it was interpreted in a different version. I've mentioned there's a Christian Science Branch Church here who says that they most often read from the King James Version. And that's kind of the direction you're going, that all versions are okay.
Yeah.
Are we following our leader?
That's true. Are we following? We go back to what did she say?
But as long as she follows Christ.
Yes. But we are not, even though we're independent, this is foremost in our thought, is are we in obedience to what Mrs. Eddy gave us? We're not going out on some, tangent. Someone was telling me there's a church in California, they sit in a circle on the floor and clap hands and sing songs, and I don't know how they get away with that, but certainly nothing that being independent doesn't mean that that's what we would do. Whatever we do, we always ask ourselves, would Mrs. Eddy approve of this? Would God, and certainly would God would approve of it, so we don't go doing out there things. Another huge difference is we write our own lessons. We publish our own magazine. We have a little publishing room here that we do it all ourselves. Just about everything we do is free. You can buy it, but it's online and it is free. We'd like to keep it that way. That's why we do appreciate your donation. Some of you are doing charity because there are those who don't donate. So we appreciate your donation so we can keep it free, available to everyone, because freely we have received, freely we give. But we do it all here, and that stems back to what Day Day says, where you're all responsible for this. You all are responsible for this. Everyone, to keep it going. It could stop tomorrow. We have a responsibility, and we must live up to that responsibility, and we know it.
There's brings up an interesting thing, is that in some sense we have to be careful about setting the bar too high. Maybe that doesn't sound right, but if we compare ourselves too much to the Boston church, then we kind of make ourselves like a Boston church. If you think about branch churches in general, that's kind of what we are. And we do infinitely more than any branch church I know of. And so it is absolutely phenomenal, the things that the Plainfield Church does. Just kind of put in that context.
Thank you.
I think that's a good point, Tom. It's important for us to recognize the difference and to be grateful for the difference and to support the difference, and for each one of us to be responsible for making this church as good as we possibly can. But we want to be careful that we don't put a comparison out there that makes us a target. I agree with you.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That we don't demonize the Boston Church.
That's
to believe in the error.
I'm sorry.
That's a very, very important point. Yes,
I
and
think
that's
that's really important. Okay.
You're right.
And it is important. And for the most part, you know, we have moved on. That's why we don't talk a lot about this anymore. But because it's come up, and because new people ask, as Benjamin says he gets the question so often, I thought, well, it's time to let you all speak to it. Well, we didn't get to the fallibility of human concepts today, but we will next week. And you can still consider thinking about this. They were all excellent, everything you said, and I hope that helps everyone.
I just wanted to say thanks for everybody's input. That was really quite a discussion.
It was wonderful. It was wonderful. I'm going to end now with a little bit from Martha Wilcox on pages 113, 114, and 115. We were talking about our personality and individuality. Mrs. Wilcox says, a false belief of personality is robbing us of our birthright. The false sense of personality seems to be a medium for seeing sin, disease, and death. It is necessary to supplant this false sense with the spiritual fact of man. Back of all appearances lies reality, all there actually is. Rid ourselves of this false sense of self and others by replacing with the truth about man or the Christ. Do this renewing by degrees. This supplants and replaces in consciousness, and I gradually find myself here, as I always have been, and the accompanying personality and mortality dissolve. The God of individual being must be allowed self-expression. No individual can do a thing of himself. Because we are each individual, we must each express our individual self. Each has a calling. No one else can fill it. You cannot do another's work. Neither can another do the work that you should do. We are all the fulfillment of God's great plan. Let ourselves be God glorifying himself, is myself, expressed as my individuality. Let him fulfill his divine plan and purpose. So that's what you are. Thank God for it. Thank you.
Okay, let's have a great service upstairs.
Thank you all
very much.
Recording stop.